are you doing today? Today I'm going to read you a story from the Bob Jones Reading for Christian Schools 3rd grade book. This story is called Danger on the Mountain. This story has 4 different parts, so we're going to read all 4 parts today. It's like little chapters. Danger on the Mountain. The first part is called A New Puppy. Hansel stomped his feet to shake the snow off his boots. Then he carried his armload of firewood into the kitchen. Grandmother shivered as he dropped the firewood into the wooden box near the stove. "It's getting colder, Hansel," she said, smiling at him. "Make sure the back door is closed tightly." "When is Grandfather coming home?" asked Hansel as he pushed hard on the door. Grandmother glanced at the old clock above the table. "He's late now," she said. "He stopped at Pastor's house to drop off a load of firewood. They probably got to talking, as always. He'll be along soon." Hansel rubbed a circle on the window pane and peered out. "Here he comes now. He has a big basket with him." Hansel hurried to open the door. Grandfather came in, still carrying the big basket. "What's that, Grandfather?" Hansel asked. Grandfather's eyes twinkled. "Oh, just a little something for you," he teased. Grandmother wiped her hands and came to look over the shoulders as Grandfather put the basket on the floor. The covering on the basket quivered, and a soft nose appeared under the edge of the rough cloth. Then the covering slid, and a puppy sat up, one edge of the cloth draped over one eye. "A puppy for me!" Hansel exclaimed, gathering the puppy up in his arms. "That's what Pastor said, just for you," Grandfather smiled. "He's a St. Bernard. His mother died when he was born, so we will have to take special care of him. What do you think of him?" "He's terrific!" Hansel grinned happily at the puppy, wiggled and licked his face. "And just what are you going to call this fine puppy?" asked Grandmother. "He should have a special name." Hansel held the puppy still enough to gaze into his brown eyes. "You are an orphan, just like me," he said. "I will call you Orphan." The word orphan means somebody whose parents have died. So when your parents have died, you are an orphan. But Hansel is very lucky that his grandparents are still alive and he can live with him. Grandmother gave Hansel a hug. "That's a fine name," she said. "Now I'll find him a warm corner while you get ready for supper." Okay, this is part 2, Orphan. As the months went by, Orphan grew bigger and bigger. Soon, instead of carrying Orphan, Hansel found that he could ride on Orphan's back. Through the spring and summer, Hansel and Orphan played together. Hansel grew strong and brown in the sun. Orphan just grew. Hansel's friend Marcus liked Orphan too. The boys and Orphan spent many long summer hours racing through the woods and along the green slopes of the mountain. "I declare," said Grandmother as she watched them one day, "I don't think those 3 have left one stone unturned on this mountain." Grandfather laughed. "They're just boys," he said. Then he added, "It's good to know the land. In the winter, the mountain can be dangerous. It is good for them to know what lies hidden under a blanket of winter snow." Grandmother nodded. "I pray the Lord will take care of them when winter comes. I always hate to have them ski down the mountain to school." "That is the way it has always been, Mother," said Grandfather. "We must teach them what we can and trust the Lord to take care of them." As autumn came closer, Grandfather went with Hansel and Marcus more often. He taught them where the safe ski trails would be when snow blanketed the land. He showed them dangerous spots where snowdrifts would pile up over their heads, and everywhere they went, Orphan followed. Soon September came, and it was time to go to school in the valley. Every day Hansel walked down the slope to Marcus's house. Together they walked the rest of the way down the mountain to school. In the afternoons, Orphan met Hansel at Marcus' house. He and Hansel would race the rest of the way home. The leaves changed color and fell from the trees. The boys waxed their skis and began exercising to make their ankles stronger. Orphan sniffed the strange boards tied to the boys' feet. "Oh, Orphan," cried Hansel, "watch out!" For the second time, Orphan had run in front of him as he practiced walking on the skis. Marcus laughed as Hansel landed in a heap on top of Orphan. But soon Orphan got used to the strange boards the boys called skis. And at last the day came that the boys had been waiting for. Hansel came running in from the barn. It's snowing, he called. Grandfather looked up from his leather work. "Yes," he said, "there will be lots of snow on the ground by morning." "Enough to ski to school?" asked Hansel eagerly. "Enough to ski to school," replied Grandfather, smiling. Okay, next part. The next part's called Danger. The next morning, Hansel put on his coat, hat, and mittens. He strapped his school pack onto his back. Grandmother went to the door to watch Hansel buckle on his skis. Orphan was too busy with the funny white stuff on the ground to pay attention to the skis this morning. He jumped and rolled in the snow. Then he tried to run, plowing through the snow and sending sprays of powdery snow over everyone. See his little footprints? "Be careful, Orphan," Hansel laughed. "I don't want to have to dig you out. I must be at school before 8. Grandmother and Grandfather waved goodbye as Hansel skied down the slope to Marcus's house. Orphan plowed through the snow after him. Grandfather looked down at Grandmother's worried face. "Now, Mother," he said, "let's just pray and leave it with the Lord." Each morning, the boys skied to school. Each afternoon, Orphan met them at Marcus's house. The days went by quickly. Then, one morning, Grandfather looked at the sky and shook his head. "It just doesn't look right today, Hansel," he said. "Why not, Grandfather?" asked Hansel, looking at the sky. "Bad weather is coming," replied Grandfather. "Be careful today, son." "I will, Grandfather," promised Hansel. Before he left the house, he and his grandparents took more time than usual in prayer. Then Hansel left for school. Orphan followed, but came back later, whining softly. Then he lay down outside, facing the ski trail. By noon, the sky had turned a flat gray. The teacher dismissed school early. Hansel and Marcus strapped their skis to their backs and hurried up the trail, keeping watchful eyes on the darkening sky. Suddenly, Marcus called, "Wait, Hansel." Hansel turned back. Marcus was down on one knee, holding his ankle. Hansel stopped beside him just as the snow began to fall. "I've twisted my ankle," said Marcus. "Did you break it?" Hansel asked, kneeling beside Marcus. "No," Marcus replied as he stood up slowly. "But I can't walk. What will we do?" Okay, on for the next part, rescue. Snow began falling faster, swirling around Marcus and Hansel. The icy flakes stung their faces. Marcus hobbled on his ankle. "Go on, Hansel, you can get help." "No, I won't leave you," Hansel replied. "Then they'll send help when we don't get home on time." "But we left school early today," said Marcus. "They won't know. They'll think we're safe in school." By now they could no longer see more than a few feet in front of them. "We must remember what Grandfather taught us," said Hansel. "We must find shelter through the storm." The boys made their way slowly to the shelter of some overhanging rocks that Grandfather had pointed out so long ago. They huddled close together to keep warm. They talked for a while about different things, then sat watching the white sheet of snow. "We'll be all right, Marcus," said Hansel. "I know we will." "How can you know?" Marcus asked. "We might never be found." "Because we prayed about this just this morning," said Hansel, "and I know the Lord will answer our prayer." Marcus nodded. "Yes, I know the Lord answers prayers." For a moment the boys didn't speak. They stared out into the whirling snow. Then, without looking at Hansel, Marcus spoke quietly. "But I'm still afraid." "So am I," Hansel replied. "Let's pray and ask the Lord to give us courage and to help Grandfather to find us quickly." Both boys bowed their heads and began to pray. The snow piled higher and higher on the mountain. At the house, Orphan raced back and forth, whining and scratching at the door. Grandfather nodded. "I know how you feel, Orphan, and I know what we both can do about it." Grandmother got warm clothing for him while he went to the porch to get rope and snowshoes. Grandfather tied the rope carefully to Orphan and put on the snowshoes. Then he and Orphan walked out into the white storm. The icy wind whipped at them, but Grandfather bent his head and held onto the rope. Orphan plowed through the snow, moving slowly down the trail. Then, as they passed the barn, the swirling snow lessened, and Grandfather could see ahead of him. He felt a tug on the rope as Orphan, too, moved ahead more freely. Grandfather strained to see further along the trail in front of him, but all he could see were the outlines of the tall evergreens that bordered the trail. He and Orphan moved slowly along the trees. As they neared the overhanging rocks, Orphan stopped and raised his head. He barked and swung off the trail. "Good boy," said Grandfather, moving with the dog. They found the boys huddled under the rocks. "Orphan!" Hansel sat up as Orphan licked his face. "You made it, Grandfather." Grandfather looked at Marcus's ankle, then lifted him onto his back. We are all right, Hansel," Marcus said, "just like you said we would be. The Lord helped your grandfather to find us, and he gave us courage when we were afraid." Ahead of them, Orphan gave a quick bark. "Come on," he seemed to say. "Come on." All right, that's the end of that story. I hope that you liked it and enjoyed and I hope that you have a great day. We'll talk to you again soon. Bye.